If you like this content, please consider becoming a member or a patron. Hi, I've done a lot of videos on this channel about female characters in modern media today, a boatload in fact, and I think that at this point there is not really much more that I need to say about how female characters are portrayed in modern media. But what about men? That's right, today we're going to be talking about the way that men are portrayed in modern movies today, and this has been brewing up for a while, to the point where once upon a time I thought I wouldn't have a lot to say about this, but now, boy, do I have a lot to say. Now, for years, I was under the impression that men actually got better writing than women in movies. Now, wait. Before you strike me down and scream at me, let me explain as to why I thought that was. Because when women are written in media, there's like this weird, social consciousness about it. Like you're nervous about how you're going to portray women. I've done videos about how women tend to be portrayed as women first and characters second, and we've talked so much about how in media for the past 10 years, there's been a lot of cases of women becoming idealized in media, becoming Mary Sue characters so that they have no flaws or they struggle to write them with flaws or real arcs, and therefore they become uninteresting because they're inhuman. And the reason why I thought that male characters might get better writing is because they weren't under the same stigma of idealization. There wasn't the same sort of social consciousness of writing them of how they needed to be portrayed, or so I thought at the time. But now looking into it, I'm thinking, it actually is true that male characters are being idealized in a certain way in media, just not in the way that you might think, not the way that would seem obvious. Now, I have a completely different opinion of that now that I have actually seen more and thought more about it and seen more of the destruction of how writing, which I do believe is idealizing men these days in a different way than women are idealized, is harming actual good writing, is actually harming these characters. Now, it wouldn't be a shock if I told you that typically the tropes we see in male characters these days are two things, two archetypes. Either the male character is depressed or he's a clown. I mean, just look at these examples. Depressed, clown, depressed, clown, depressed, clown, depressed, and clown. These are just the very typical go-to archetypes that Hollywood likes to go to when it comes to male characters in media. Either he's a silly goof or he's a broken man who has to rise above his brokenness if he does in the end. This has been pointed out by a lot of different outlets, including the New York Times, that is Hollywood's go-to for men in the modern day. And once again, I would say that this, at a glance, that inadvertently gives men better writing than female characters has had. Why? Because it is far easier to write a character in general from a place of conflict and flaws than it is when the main idea is that how they're perfect all the time. If a man is depressed or he's silly, that gives him a conflict, something to work through, and then that can be a more interesting arc. A great example I would like to give of this is what the Barbie movie did. In the Barbie movie, Ken actually became the more relatable character to most people. Why? Because Greta Gerwig was bogged down with Barbie, with all she had to represent and all she had to be, that it was convoluted and confusing, and in the end, nobody could agree on what Barbie's arc was actually supposed to be in the film. But Ken was just given a straightforward arc. He's unseen and he wants to feel seen, and that's something that a lot of people could relate to, and that is one of the ways that men might inadvertently get better writing than female characters. It's even though our ideal for female characters is to be strong, but male characters are allowed to be more subdued, and that ironically gives them the better writing. But it would also make you believe that male characters are not being idealized in media because this is a negative trope, to be sad, depressed, giving up, or silly, or clownish. Those are negative attributes. But actually, this does lead into how male characters are actually being idealized, typically idealized by writers, just in a different way. Hollywood, in its post-Me Too era, does enjoy the trope of depressed male character or silly male character. And those in and of itself are not bad tropes to explore in media. There's a lot of characters who are iconic where their default is they're depressed, they have a bad past, they need to rise above this somehow. And there's no problem with that, and that can be very well written, and there are still a lot of characters we enjoy like that. The problem is when it affects characters where they're not supposed to be that way. It's already been discussed to death what happened to characters like Luke Skywalker or Indiana Jones or the Lucasfilm characters in terms of changing lighthearted, positive characters into basically these depressed men who are giving up and maybe need a spunky lady to bring them out of their depression. That's already been discussed to death, and those are examples of assassinating characters for the sake of fitting with this trope. But I want to use an example of how male characters are written today that may be less obvious. Peter B. Parker from the Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse movie. Now, in Into the Spider-Verse, Peter B. Parker follows the trope of depressed, broken man who needs to rise above and is encouraged to do so by his younger counterpart. But the thing about it is it portrays the trope very well. It makes sense. This is a Peter Parker from an alternate universe who has just been destroyed as a character. And while his cynicism and depressed nature is played up for comedy, there also is a certain gravitas to it, and he's portrayed in a very mature way. And even though he winds up getting some encouragement back from Miles by the end of the movie, Peter is still ultimately portrayed as the wiser, more experienced one. And even though he's made mistakes, he is still ultimately portrayed as the more mature, wise one, as opposed to Miles, who does impart wisdom to him. And in the end, it is Miles who is able to feed that very same lesson back to him, and Peter Parker grows from somebody who had given up on his life and was making decisions out of fear to someone who is no longer driven by fear and cares about the people around him first and foremost. So you see, you have a good storyline and a good arc here. And then there was what they did with Peter B. Parker in the follow-up movie. In Across the Spider-Verse, we don't get much of Peter B. Parker, but when he shows up, he's all of a sudden in this pink robe and bunny slippers, pink slippers, running around endangering his child, and it's all played up for laughs. As Miles is getting chased by every person in this spider society, Peter B. Parker, is not taking it serious at all. He's very carefree about it, and he's just played up as a silly goof who doesn't take things seriously when they need to be taken seriously. At one point, he tries to impart some wisdom to Miles, but it's overshadowed by the fact that he isn't taking this as seriously as he needs to be. And then later, when Miles gets away, Peter is instantly shut up by the other people around him. Just look at this scene.
Just take a breath.
You want to back me up?
Well, okay, Miguel, as a father of a daughter and the son of a mother...
Yeah, actually, stop talking.
Okay, duly noted.
That is not something that Peter B. Parker, the one we knew in the previous film, would ever do, especially considering his growth. He should be more assertive and more wiser and more mature in this version, but now he's less mature. He's made into a joke overall, and he's a complete pushover. These are the people who just brutally attack his friend and somebody who he even might see as a surrogate son in a way, and he just rolls over and plays dead as they're attacking another person on the team. That isn't Peter Parker at all. That isn't this Peter B. Parker version. And some people were confused as to why they took this in the direction of him. Did they just get carried away by the comedy and were trying to use him for comic relief? Other people thought that they didn't want him to overshadow Miles' story in any way, and that's why they portrayed him in this way. But this is a very typical trope that we see with male characters these days. They need to be, dare I say it, emasculated. I know that that word is going to lead people to making a lot of assumptions about me and what my beliefs are about these characters, but hear me out. Just as the trope with female characters is always, she must be strong, and for years that was all people cared about. Female characters must be strong and assertive first and foremost. Even if there's nothing else behind that, they must be strong and assertive. Male characters are the exact opposite. When I say they're emasculated, I mean they're subdued, they're weakened, they don't stand up when they should, they don't act with the maturity and wisdom when they should. Obviously, in media, if writers are given freedom and you can have a lot of dynamic different characters, you will have some male characters who are emasculated. You will have some male characters who are weakened, who are maybe goofier, but it all depends on what the character is supposed to be. Peter B. Parker should not have been an emasculated character in this setting. He should not have been a weaker character. He should have been a stronger character in this setting, given the growth that we saw him on. But we didn't see that pulled through. And we might be able to erase it as just maybe a mistake on the writer's part. Like, once again, maybe they got carried away with the humor of the character, but that just is not the pattern that we see in Hollywood. Here is another example of a film where the characters should have been more masculine than what they weren't. Gladiator 2. Now, once again, you can do characters that are weakened and emasculated all you want if that fits in with the setting, but it did not fit with Gladiator 2. Gladiator is supposed to be a story about a warrior named Maximus who was assertive and his men loved him and he was very accomplished. And it was because he was so strong and accomplished that he drew the ire of the weak man, Commodus, who wanted to take him down because of that and was able to kill his family. And it's a story of Maximus getting revenge on Commodus for destroying his life. But then the follow-up movie, Gladiator 2, we follow a man who is allegedly supposed to be Maximus's son, and we hear it throughout the movie that he has that fire of Maximus within him that everyone can see. The problem is neither the writing or the character performance reflect that. Paul Mescal does not play this character with the same fire and drive of Maximus. In fact, we see him fail a lot in the beginning, which would be fine to see characters fail, but at no point in the beginning do we see any example of him being a strong, capable, or even wise leader, where Maximus led with strength and got people to trust him and showed that his plans would pay off, which is why people trusted him. Paul Mescal's character's plans just fail when he tells people to trust him, and his demeanor is far more like the male characters of today, depressed and subdued. There is never a moment in the movie where I see any reason for people to rally behind him, because he does not portray himself as a capable person or with a strong spirit. I mean, he can't even decide if he's brokenhearted over his wife's death or if he kind of thinks it's funny that he's being taken into slavery. The same could be said about Pedro Pascal in the movie. He's supposed to be an accomplished general, but he just comes off as kind of depressed and repressed in it, subdued, weakened, emasculated, dare I say it. While the script is telling me one thing, it is showing me the exact opposite. And once again, the problem is this is a scenario where I would have to believe that these are strong men. They're going against the Roman Empire, but they're not strong men as I see them. And it's frustrating because the story doesn't work with these kinds of characters. It doesn't work in this kind of setting. When I talk about female characters and how they always have to be strong, the main problem behind that is not just that it's bad writing where you can't connect to characters if you're only concerned with them putting on this front of being strong and assertive and you don't put any substance or development or an arc behind that, but it restricts the storytelling of female characters if they can only ever be strong, if they can only ever be the assertive ones. You need to have your flawed female characters. You need to have your ones that are more vulnerable. But by the same token, the flip side of it, if you refuse that men can ever be strong or that men can ever be the wiser, mature, more masculine characters, then you are also limiting the types of storytelling that you can do with male characters, and you are ruining a lot of these storylines, as we see when Hollywood tries to make these kinds of movies that traditionally would need to have a more masculine character, because I need to believe he could fight and win a war against a dictatorship. They can't do it. And we just see so many different examples in media of while we demand that female characters only ever be strong and assertive, we seem to dislike going to the weakened male trope. Just to show how this kind of thinking from Hollywood affects other characters that are supposed to be stronger, more assertive, or even just have different personalities. You all know that I blew my lid off because of the changes made to Johnny Storm's character in the new Fantastic Four movie. I've already explained who Johnny Storm is supposed to be, beginning as a very immature character who loves being a hero. He fancies himself as a ladies' man, but it's more in an immature kind of way. But they said that they're not going to do that this time because that isn't attractive these days, not where we are culturally, according to Joseph Quinn. So how did they say they were going to change him? They were going to make him more melancholic. Of course they were going to do that. Honestly, seeing the trailers, it seems that they just kind of made him more like Tony Stark. But of course they would make him melancholic because that is the favorite go-to from Hollywood. They want men to be more depressed, more repressed, more melancholic. Men who are rambunctious and strong strong and assertive, no matter what the context, those are scary. Those are threatening. Men who are confident are threatening. So they go to the depressed, melancholic, or clownish trope oftentimes. Another example would be a villain. I recently just got done watching the Daredevil show, and I watched Kingpin and his wife, who used to have this dynamic, Kingpin being this evil villain, his wife being oddly devoted to him no matter what he did, and them having this odd devotion between them. And I watched them change Vanessa's character to now an assertive, strong woman who is allegedly better at running the criminal empire than Wilson Fisk himself. She cheated on Wilson Fisk, and his reaction, surprisingly, after she describes the cheating on him, even smiling about it, is, "You're even more extraordinary now." But it got worse because her excuse for cheating was, "You weren't there for me. You disappeared. And that reminds me of what my dad did, and that's why I did this cheating." And his response in the end is, "You are even more extraordinary now." This is some sick stuff, because this is essentially romanticizing the battered spouse syndrome. And by the way, we've seen that in media before, where the woman will cheat and the man will accept it and say, "You know, it was actually my fault." Please, whether you are male or female, please do not accept this. This is battered spouse syndrome. This is a toxic relationship. If you are in a relationship with anyone and they tell you, "Oh, actually, the reason why I cheated, the reason why I did these bad things, it's actually your fault. It's your fault because you weren't there for me. You weren't adequate enough." That is battered spouse syndrome, and it is really sick for them to be romanticizing that like they do in this show. But they do, I guess now this is the more acceptable villain couple dynamic for them to have, where now Vanessa's the one who cheated and is better than Fisk, and if he submits to her and just accepts it and promises that it was his fault and that he'll never do it again, this is the acceptable power dynamic between them. And at that point, it becomes even more than just changing the characters from who they're supposed to be. It ends up romanticizing some pretty sick stuff. Like, you think that being a battered spouse as a man is more preferable to what the original dynamic was supposed to be. We see that though in media a lot, though, that slights against men are more of a go-to to Hollywood, even as they're trying to move against these sort of slights against women. For example, I've seen it 3 times now in media where the go-to with male characters was them to be assaulted in some way. We saw it in Joker 2, we saw it in Thor Love and Thunder, played as a joke, we saw it in Wonder Woman 1984 where it was never addressed. These are all supposed to be big mainstream movies, and their go-to was assaulting the male character. Now, I'm not saying that all of these things say that there were good things. Frankly, Joker 2 just seemed to do it just to do it, but I do think that that's interesting. Like, we're far more comfortable going to assault and playing it up for laughs, or just blowing it off, or just doing it very casually if it's a male character. Obviously, we shouldn't be doing it casually if it's any character. That is a subject that needs to be handled with a lot of tact, but I'm just noticing that even as Hollywood moves away from depicting that with female characters, they somehow seem to think that it's okay and acceptable now to depict it with male characters. I guess it's just another example about how men are really subdued in media today and really brought down. So we've talked a lot about how male characters are being emasculated, weakened, how certain male characters are being changed from what they were in the source material off of pearl clutching and a fear about how certain tropes will be reacted to these days. Even if they're blatantly made out to be flaws, the go-to storyline Hollywood seems to like is that they're depressed or not assertive. If they have certain negative qualities that Hollywood is fearful of depicting, like say being flirtatious or being a womanizer or being a little sexist, even where it's portrayed as more of an immature thing for them to grow out of, and they do, they need to get rid of that because they don't want to offend anyone by even depicting this kind of stuff. Men, even when they're supposed to be stronger in settings where they're meant to be more assertive, are still emasculated and weakened, and we're perfectly fine by portraying things like assault against men and not even acknowledging it, because that's perfectly acceptable to do so. You can make fun of men, you can weaken them. While women can only ever be strong and assertive in media, for men it's okay to weaken them and emasculate them and even portray some pretty heinous acts against them very flippantly. And you might say that the opposite between how female characters are written and male characters are written, or female characters are idealized and male characters are the exact opposite of that. But the more I think of it, the more I think male characters are being idealized in a way. It's just that this is the Hollywood ideal for men. I can't deny that a lot of this is probably happening because of the Me Too movement, a movement that Hollywood started because of the things that Hollywood did behind the scenes protecting people like Harvey Weinstein and Dan Schneider and all of them. And ever since then, they've been punishing the rest of us with how our characters are depicted in media. There was a cavalcade of these strong Mary Sue female characters after this, and a cavalcade of weaker male characters after this, portrayed in this way. It's all an apology, I guess, correcting the way that these characters must be portrayed in media. And you might say, once again, that this is not the ideal for male characters. They're being unidealized, but isn't it? I think this is the exact ideal of the modern day. Just read that interview with Joseph Quinn and Johnny Storm. They are trying to reach an ideal. It's just that this is what they think that it is, in contrast to the rest of the world. To Hollywood, the ideal man is someone who is emasculated, somebody who is weakened, whether it's by depression or a lack of assertiveness or by just clownery. This is their ideal that they are presenting in modern media. Why do you think Pedro Pascal gets so much work with the kinds of characters he typically portrays? We typically had examples in the past of who would be the masculine leading man of the day, and now we get Pedro Pascal, and that's because he is a reflection of what Hollywood wants to promote these days. Why do they do all of this to male characters? Well, because a strong and assertive male character is a threatening male character. A character like Maximus in the old days, who's very strong, and he doesn't back down, and he doesn't allow himself to be bogged down by depression, but rather motivated by it, that is a threatening male character. A character who is hot-headed and active and flirtatious and just loves being a hero, like Johnny Storm, that cannot exist in the modern day. If you are truly confident in yourself and the way that you approach women, no, that is too much. That is too assertive. That is threatening. You need to stay in your place. You need to be more melancholy about it. You need to be less confident. The reason why these male characters are being changed is because they are threatening to people, or at least a certain small group of people out there when they see these characters being presented, even if they are presented as heroic characters at the end of the day, where their strength and their masculinity is put to good use in protecting other people, or stopping bad guys, or stopping weaker, more insecure, selfish men. These are essentially dangerous men because their actions put to good use can enact change in these stories, and that is not what Hollywood wants to see these days. A strong man is a threatening man, and that's why we get all these emasculated, weak characters subdued versus strong, assertive female characters. We even see that in the recent Fantastic Four movie. The men are portrayed more melancholy, with Reed Richards mulling over the doomsday of the world.
It's my fault. I stretched the bounds of space, and they hurt.
We safe?
I don't know.
Well, Sue is the assertive one and the strong one that we can even see just by their demeanors.
Are you the protectors of this world?
Yes, we are.
I'm not giving up.
We will face this together. We will fight it together as a family.
Now, what is the problem with all of this? Is this me trying to get to some ideal of masculinity that I would like to see in movies? No. Inevitably, with all of these conversations, because these changes to male characters are made, because of social consciousness and because of ideals of the day, at least coming from Hollywood, it is a kind of discussion that's going to bring a lot of people from the side of politics to discuss it and discuss how men must be portrayed in media and what the real ideal of men is. But that's not what I'm all about here. I am not about what ideal you might have and what you want to portray, because based on that ideal. Actually, I am very anti-stories must be based on whatever ideal you have about what a man should be or what a woman should be in the day. What I want here is creative freedom and being able to portray characters, male characters, the way they're supposed to be portrayed. Because listen, it might shock you to know, but as a woman, there are a lot of male characters who mean a lot to me and that I relate to, and I don't appreciate when they are changed off of some ideal from some idiot in Hollywood. I don't want to see Sokka from Avatar changed because someone misread the fact that he was immature and a little sexist in the beginning and decided that he needed to be more idealized. I didn't want Johnny Storm to be changed into a melancholy, which is the exact opposite of his personality, because somebody behind the scenes got it into their head that he needed to fit the ideals of today, whatever that is. I want male characters that I love to be themselves and not be idealized by the standards of Hollywood in the same way that they are trying to portray female characters and idealize them. No, not every male character should be the peak of strength and maturity and masculinity and all of those things. But by the same token, you should not be saying that that can never exist either. When I am watching an action movie and I am supposed to root for somebody, a man, as a hero, I don't want to see a weakened man bogged down by his own emotions and depression. I want somebody that I can actually root for. I don't want you to remove the flaws of a male character because you want to patronize me and think that I cannot handle him going on an arc. I don't want you to treat something like SA flippantly in your media just because it's against a man. I don't want you to be romanticizing cheating in any way possible or making it out like women are cheaters and that is somehow okay if it's against a man. Because romanticizing cheating, no matter who it's against, is romanticizing cheating. Here is my main problem with media today. It is not that media does not fit my ideals. It is that media is trying to be too idealized. The main purpose of storytelling is to explore all these different worlds, all these different characters, all these different experiences. And just as things in real life can be messy and complicated and see all these different kinds of dynamics, that is what I should be feeling from media as well, from entertainment, from stories. In real life, you will meet men who are stronger and weaker and all kinds of flaws and all kinds of strengths, the same as you will from women in real life, and that is what I want to see depicted on screen. When you say that men can't be strong, that they need to be weakened, that the go-to is for them to be more depressed and silly, you are not only being pretty insulting to men, but you are limiting the kinds of stories that you can tell, and you are limiting my immersion in these stories. I'm so tired of going to the theater and seeing this corporate-approved slop that makes sure it checks all the boxes of not offending anyone. It feels sterile. It's why there have been multiple times over the past few years that I have felt myself losing my passion for film. And the way I get it back is I watch things from the 70s, 80s, 90s when they were more free. They were more free in the kinds of stories and characterizations that they could explore. Versus today, when it's like Hollywood is trying to idealize everything because it's trying to scale everything back and making sure that these characters fit into these separate approved boxes so that they don't step on everyone's toes, so that they don't give off a negative impression, so they never get away from what they think the ideal of how men and women should act in real life. I'm so tired of it, and it's what makes me grow disillusioned by Hollywood, by modern media, and just want to escape to something else, escape to foreign media that does not have these strange restrictions on how male characters and female characters can be portrayed. It's like the modern day Hays Code, whereas the original Hays Code was clear and was done by religious and conservative groups in order to scale back content in media, these are more vague, undefined, unspoken rules that we just see all the time and how characters are held back. I don't want to see Marvel adapt any more male characters from the comics or female for that matter, because it's like I know how it's gonna go. I know what they're gonna change. I know what they're gonna take away because of the modern ideals that they feel that they need to fit. So in the conclusion, while I originally thought that male characters got better writing, incidentally, than female characters, I now think that they get equally as bad writing because all media these days from America is under an unspoken Hays Code where everything has to be corrected and approved and put out there, and it doesn't actually open the doors for us to feel new experiences or to have even a life-changing situation with a movie, which some movies I've seen in the past have changed my life quite literally. No, we need to keep our experiences up to a little perfect contained box. So we won't have new ideas, so we won't have new experiences, so that we all follow the same idea. But the problem is, that's boring, and it's why Hollywood is losing a lot of its viewership right now, when if they only broadened their horizons and allowed things to happen like they did in the late 60s and 70s, where the Hays Code was thrown out and people opened themselves up to new media and new, even scary media out there, then they could actually win a lot of people back. But will they ever realize this? At this point, it's getting harder and harder for me to believe so. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a patron or a member. Thank you for watching this video. It was a little bit harder for me to make. What do you think about men in movies these days? Do you agree or disagree with my thoughts? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.